Hi everybody, welcome back on my channel. This is the fourth session of the General Prologue to the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. In the last session, we talked about the characters were the merchant, the clerk, and man of laws. In this session, we're going to talk about Franklin, then five other characters who were in a group, that is Haberdashire, carpenter, a weaver, dyer, and a tapestry maker. And then we're going to talk about the cook in this session. So let's continue with Franklin. A Franklin was in his company. So the last character was man of laws. And after that, Chaucer says, a Franklin was in his company, white was his beard, as is the daisies. Of his complexion, he was sanguine. So he starts by talking about his physical traits. He says that his beard was white as daisy. Then he talks about his personality, that is his temperament. I hope you've read about the four humors, which would talk about the personality trait of a person. So that's what here Chaucer says. He says Franklin was of sanguine temperament, which is, it shows active, social kind of a person. So that's how the Franklin was. Well loved he by the morrow a sop in wine. To live in delight was ever his wont, for he was Epicurus' own son. So he says, well loved he by the morrow a sop in wine. In the morning, he loved to have a sip of wine. To live in delight was ever his want. He just wanted to live happily, in delight. For he was Epicurus' own son. Epicurus, the Greek philosopher, that held opinion that plain delight was verily felicite perfect. So he's called Epicurus' own son, the philosopher's own son, because even he believed that, he held this opinion that simple चीजों में खुशी ढूंढना, plain delight was verily felicite perfect. That was the perfect happiness that one could have. And householder, and that agreed was he, Saint Julian, he was in his country. Now he's called a householder because he was a great host. He was very great. He's also called Saint Julian. Saint Julian is, why? Because he's known for his hospitality. That is why he was such a great householder. Saint Julian, he was in his country. His bread, his ale was always, after on, a better envined man was nowhere known. He had the best quality of bread. He had the best quality of liquor, ale with him, and no other person was known better than the Franklin in his town where he lived. A better envined man was nowhere known. Somebody who had the best stock of wine. So nobody else had the best stock of wine than the Franklin. Without baked meat was never his house. So he always had bake pies in his house of fish and flesh, that of plenteous. So even fish and all kind of meat he had plenty in his house that people could come and eat nicely. So that is why he's been called the best host. It snowed in his house of meat and drink. So snowfall होती थी उसके घर में meat और drink की. It snowed in his house of meat and drink, of ale dainties that men knew think. He had all kinds of delicacies that men could think about. Everything, of the season. Whatever season was going on, he would have the delicacy of that season. The best one always. After the sundry season of the year, so changed he his meat and his supper. So as the season would change, even his menu of the food and everything, ale, food would change. Full many a fat partridge had he in mew, and many a bream and many a luce in stew. He also had partridge, fat partridge. Partridge is a kind of a bird which people hunt for food. So he also had that fat partridge with him to eat probably, and many a bream and many a luce in stew. He also had, these are kinds of fishes, different bream and pike. They are the different kinds of fishes. He also had fishes. Wu was his cook, but if his sauce were point and sharp, and ready all his gear. So his cook would not be happy if the sauce that he made would not be good, spicy and full of spices and very nice tasting. So Wu was his cook. He would be sad if his sauce were not like that, and if his sauce were mostly his sauces were very good. He was a very good cook. So if everything was good, he was, every time he was ready with his gear, his cooking equipments. His table dormant in his hall always stood ready covered all the long day. He had a big table, a dining table in his hall, and it was always covered with food. It was always ready to serve people. At sessions there was he lord and sire. So he also presided as a lord and as a sire at the courts. Full often time he was knight of the shire. So many times he had also been the member of parliament. An analyst and a gypser, all of silk, hung at his girdle, white as morn milk. Belt pehni hogi usne. He had a belt. In that belt hung a dagger, analyst, and a gypser, and a purse which was made of silk. And that girdle was of white color, white as morn milk, white as morning milk. A sheriff had he been and a contour. Sab kuch kiya hai Franklin ne. He had also been a sheriff, and he has also been an auditor of the taxes, contour. Was nowhere such a worthy vavaseur. There was no other such worthy landowner. Anyway, Franklin, a landowner. So nobody you will find such a worthy landowner. This was about the Franklin. So the Franklin was, let's see, quick notes. His beard was white as a daisy compared to Daisy. His temperament was sanguine. He loved to live in delight, simple happiness. That was his opinion. That was his philosophy, like Epicurus. He was a great host. He has also been compared to Saint Julian. He always had bread and wine for everybody. Then he had all kinds of fishes and all kinds of meats. His meal changed with season. He had different varieties of fishes also. And what else? He was a lord sometimes. He had also been the member of parliament. His girdle was white color. His purse was all made of silk. He had also been a sheriff, and he had been auditor of the taxes also. So he was the greatest worthy landowner. Next is an haberdasher and a carpenter, a web, a dyer, and a tapisser. So 5 people who were together: haberdasher, carpenter, a weaver, a dyer, and a tapestry maker. And they were clothed all in a livery, all wearing similar uniform clothes. Livery mein they were dressed, one livery, of a solemn and a great fraternity. They were wearing one livery of a solemn and great parish guild. एक किसी अच्छा देख के अच्छा लग रहा था उनको. Full fresh and new their gear apiked was. उनका जो equipments थे, the gear that they had, they were very, very fresh, as if it was all new. So it was polished probably very nicely. Their knives were chapped not with brass, but all with silver, what full clean and wheel. The knives that they had, आप लोगों ने वो देखिए carvings होती है ना knives पे, So the carvings that were there on their knives, that was not made of brass. It was all silver and very clean and very well made. Their girdle and their pouches ever deal. Even the girdles that they had, the pouches that they had, they were all very fresh, very clean. Well seemed each of them a fair burgess to sit in a Yelde hall on a dais. Now each of these guildsmen, they seemed very good. They seemed all fair to sit in a Yelde hall on a dais. That they could sit in the on a dais in the city hall. Mein, on the dais, they were wise enough to be there to give their own opinions. Average for the wisdom that he can was sharply for to been an alderman. Now, because they were known for their wisdom, each of them was fit to be an alderman. Alderman is you all know mayor. You know, mayor hota hai kisi place ka. Next to the status of the mayor is the alderman. So they were all fit to be an alderman. For cattle had they enough and rent. They had enough possessions. They had a good number of things with them, and they had enough income. They had good rent, and eke their wives would it well assent. Each of their wives would assent to that, because their wives lived happily, lived comfortably, and else certain were they to blame. Otherwise, it was certain that they were to blame if the wives did not live very comfortably. It is full fair to be ye clept madam, and gone to vigilies all before, and have a mantle royally ye bore. Who doesn't like to be called a madam? It's very good to be called a madam. The wives, because the guildsmen were wise enough, were respected in the society, even the wives lived like that. They were called madam. They would go to the feasts, they would go to the church processions, and they would have a mantle royally kiye bore. Matlab, they would wear that gown beautifully, royally, and it would be carried like a royal person for them. That was the 5 guildsmen. Quick revision. Habitshire, carpenter, a weaver, a dyer, and a tapestry maker. They were all dressed in one livery. Then whatever they wore, their gears, it was all very fresh. It was all very neatly kept. They had knives that had carvings with silver. They had the belt, the girdle. Girdle is a belt. The girdle was there. The purses that they carried were all very nice. They seemed well. And they seemed well to even sit on a country hall, on a dais. Everyone was wise enough to be an alderman. Their wives would assent to it that they had enough with them. And the wives were called madam, and they wore beautiful gowns. Next we have is a cook. Have a look on the cook. So with them, they had a cook. A cook they had with them for the nones to boil the chicken with the marrow bones. And powder merchant tart and gallingale well knew a draught of London ale. What does the cook do? A cook cooks. So the cook knew very well to boil the chickens with the marrow bones. The cook also had a powder merchant. Powder merchant was a kind of a flavoring powder in the Middle Ages. And gallingale is spices. So he very well knew how to work with them. He also knew the taste of the London ale. He would judge the London ale just by tasting it. He knew roast and seethe and broil and fry. A cook hai, so he would know all of these things. So he knew very well how to roast, how to boil, how to broil, and how to fry. Make mortukes and well bake a pie. Mortukes is a stew. Stew उबाल के बनता है. आपने अगर पिया होगा, खाया होगा. It's like a soup, stew. So he knew how to make the stew, and he also knew how to bake a pie. But great harm was it, as it taught me, that on his shin a mormal had he. Now Chaucer is concerned because if you see, look at the shin bone. There is a sore there, an open wound kind of. Chaucer says, I thought that it was of great harm that he had this open sore, a wound on his shin. Then he changes and he says, for blank manger that made he with the best. So he says that he makes this white pudding the best thing that he makes. It's what he makes best. So that's about the cook. Just these few sentences are given for the cook. The cook knows how to boil, how he has these flavoring substances with him. He knows how to judge an ale by tasting it. He knows how to roast, how to broil, how to boil and to fry. He knows how to make stew and bake a pie. And the best thing that he makes is a white pudding. But he has this open sore, a wound on his shin, which Chaucer thinks is of great harm. So that's about the cook. All right, I'll stop here now. In the next session, we'll do the next characters to come. And if you liked the video, please hit the like button. Please share it with other people. And if you've not yet subscribed to the channel, please do it so that you don't miss any of the videos to come. I'll see you in the next session. Take care. Happy studying.